Tom Holden. I went to Bloomington Housing Authority, and we sponsored the summer home improvement seminars to do a little PR and get people to know who we are, and then also help answer questions that people have on different maintenance items in their homes. On the table we have brochures for home improvement loans that the Housing Authority offers. Tonight we have Mark Masica from Hirshfield. Mark's been with them for about 40 years.
40 years this fall.
Believe it or not, and he is the district manager of the Edina store. So I'm going to turn things over to Mark and let him introduce himself better than I can, and then lead you on prep and color selection. Thank you.
All right. Well, I went to college with a business degree, and was working for the Hirshfield family just as a part-time job. And I really, really like the Hirshfield family. They're a very, very cool family. And I just kind of ended up sticking with them. Over the years, kind of discovered that I had a little bit of a knack for color. My doctor, I don't know if it's a bunch of baloney or not, but my doctor maintains that people with dark hair and light eyes see color more accurately than people with dark eyes. So I don't know if that's any scientific basis or if he's just blowing a bunch of baloney up me, but whatever. I'm actually kind of pleased that we've got this small a group because everybody will win something tonight. So, that being said, we kind of already talked about surface preparation. Surface preparation to me is pretty basic. I'm kind of old school from that regard, in that I personally believe that if your home is 10 or 15 years old or older, it's good to get some oils into the wood. And so if you have to do priming on an older home, use oil-based primer. Make sure it passes what I call the fingernail test, that it gets hard enough that you can't easily leave an indentation from your fingernail. Takes a while for that to happen. Especially understand that all paints, all products, when you look at the drying time on those cans, that's in laboratory conditions that's determined. That's at 72 degrees with 50% humidity, which we have about 3 days of in the summertime here. So remember that if we have cool evenings where you're waking up in the morning and there's a nice heavy dew on your lawn, like there was the other day when I had to spend an hour and a half cleaning my mower out after I mowed the lawn. So if you got a heavy dew, that means there's moisture in the air. Chances are not much drying happened with any paint you applied, the day before overnight. So keep that in mind. If you have a newer home, latex primers have come a long way, but I still think on an older home, oil-based primers are better. That wood is thirsty. Getting oils into that wood is better, okay? So latex primer on a newer home, oil-based primer on an older home, okay? And then always 2 finish coats, like we were all talking about earlier. 1 primer, if you've got areas where you scrape and sand down to bare wood, 1 coat of primer, 2 finish coats. Always use 2 coats. You've got all your prep work done, you've got things masked off, you've got all the work done. If you were to hire a painter, and if anybody is thinking of hiring a painter, I got 2 great guys that I deal with all the time. I brought their cards, so you can come see me afterwards and I can help you with that. But if you were to hire a painter, and I'm just throwing numbers out of just because they're easy, but let's say that they were going to charge you $5,000 to do all the prep work and put on 1 coat of paint on your house, okay? I'm just throwing it out because it's an easy number. If that $5,000 bid called for all the prep work and 1 coat of paint, if you said, well, you know what, I think I want 2 coats of finish coat paint, they're going to charge you, give or take, they're going to charge you 50% more for that 2nd coat. Because all the prep work's done, they got their painters there, everything's good to go, it's just a matter of going around the house the 2nd time and the cost of the paint. So your 2nd coat, as a general rule of thumb, is going to be half the cost of the total bid. So that right there should tell you something, that there's some wisdom in applying 2 coats of paint. You know, 1 coat of paint is 3 mils thick. We expect an awful lot out of 1 coat of paint. You know, considering the climate we live in and what it goes through. Think of that south side of the house. The sun that beats on it. My goodness, when I had the windows, my house built in 1940, when I had the windows replaced on it, the windows on the south side of my house, the glass in it had almost become like iridescent from being baked by the sun. So imagine what's happening to that coat of paint. And you're going to try and tell me that, you know, the paint you buy at the big box, they're going to say, oh, 1 coat of paint's all you need to paint the house and it'll be just fine. Baloney. It's not going to be happening. My neighbor across the street had that experience, you know, and the paint was peeling off the Adirondack chairs that she bought. She did no surface prep because she used the paint primer in 1, slapped on 2 coats of paint. Paint didn't even last 1 summer season and the paint was peeling off. You know, she went back and complained. They said, oh, we can give you your money back on it. Well, can you give me back the 8 hours I spent painting the chairs? No. So I could spend hours talking about surface preparation. I think since we're a small group, why don't you guys just ask me if you have any questions about preparation?
Surface prep, peeling of paint from windows. As when it peels, it kind of peels bad or poorly. There's no dramatic demarcation from when the peeling stopped to where there is no peeling. How do you decide how far to sand back?
Whenever you have any peeling paint, you always want to get as much loose paint as you can off. And the majority of exterior paint peeling, the majority of peeling paint outside is usually on the trim of a house, okay? And I always tell my customers you can flip over the chips and that kind of almost serves like a road map and you can kind of tell what's going on. First thing you want to look at is, okay, if it's peeling down to bare wood and there's multiple layers of paint coming off, I can tell you with 100% certainty it's due to moisture. Law of physics, moisture is going to always take the easiest avenue of exit that it can from a home. A family of 4 people living in a house in the wintertime when the house is closed up puts the equivalent, just by doing dishes, taking a shower, cooking, doing laundry, whatever, you put the equivalent of 5 gallons of moisture into the air a day. So think if every single day you took a 5-gallon pail of water and poured it down the basement floor. That moisture's got to go somewhere. So one of the troubles that we're finding over the last couple decades is these newer homes that have been built so tight, moisture can't escape, and it's causing, you hear all these horror stories about stucco homes where they've got mold and mildew issues because they've gotten the houses so tight in the name of energy efficiency that they can't breathe. And that causes paint to fail on the windows because that's the avenue of path of least resistance, let's say. Now, so again, oil primer is your best avenue. Once you've got it down to a good smooth surface, you're gonna scrape to get the initial loose paint off, and then you're gonna have kind of a ridge where the paint that's still sticking and the paint that's peeling, and that you're gonna have to take some medium sandpaper and get rid of that ridge. Okay, and then you're gonna spot prime it. Okay. Let the primer dry thoroughly, and then go ahead and paint it. And do you have windows on your house where you have to do any glazing of the? No. How about you guys? No glazing? How about you? You know what glazing is, where the glass and the wood meet? Okay. So if you scrape out the old glazing, tip that I can give you there that so many people overlook. You scrape out that old glazing, you prime the wood once you've scraped out the old glazing, then you reglaze the window, then you prime the glazing, then you repaint. And the reason that you're going, because so many times I get people in, I just reglazed this window last summer and the glazing's already falling out. Well, it's because that wood, again, is real old and dried out, and it pulls all the vehicle out of the glazing, which is the solvent liquid portion of the paint, pulls that all out, and then the glazing and the wood can't bond. So prime, glaze, prime, paint. Okay? Any other questions anybody has about?
When you spot prime, how long do you roughly have to leave it dry out? Or you just use the oil-based paint and paint it right away as soon as you get the bare wood? Or?
There hasn't been an oil-based paint on the market. The government made that go bye-bye probably in the early 70s. You have no choice but oil primer or latex primer and latex top coat.
But I mean, to spot in an oil primer, do you have to let that bare wood dry out for a while, or is it just where the oil it'll take care of it?
You mean after you do your prep work, do you have to let the wood dry before you put an oil primer in? It would all depend on how you're prepping it. If you're doing sanding and scraping, no.
Okay.
Then you can just dust it off with an old paintbrush. But if you're using a power washer or you're driving moisture into the wood, that's a whole different discussion.
Okay.
Then the wood's got to be dry.
To the point you can see it's dry, or I mean, is that?
Well, I can't honestly give you and won't, because I'd be disservicing you. I can't give you a concrete time frame as to when the wood will be dry, because it's weather driven. I can tell you that if you're using a power washer, I want 72 hours of good drying weather to pass before you put any paint on it. And that's 72 hours on the clock with no rain, no high dew points, anything like that would basically negate any any drying. Okay? Power washing, remember, really dries moisture down into the wood. Okay? So that's an important thing.
I'll say, I took one of these, it was a nasty thing I got in Target. It was supposed to be a washer for cars, but it had real tough bristles, and it spun around and had soap in it. And that thing worked wonderful. We have a shake house, and it really cleaned the things. And we really don't have any too much peeling or anything. There's a little bit on some trim.
And that probably is due to moisture. It's probably peeling down to bare wood, and that gets back to what I was talking about moisture is going to always take that path of least resistance.
Now, the last time I painted, it was hot, and we had some cracking, but it's 11 years old. It's called mud checking. So 11 years ago.
Paint was drying as you were putting it on. I always tell people that the cutoff space should be 85 degrees. And, you know, in the warm summer months, you want to try and paint in the shade. As we get into the fall, which is my personal favorite time to paint, then you want to paint in the sun when you have the cooler days. But now we want to paint in the shade. Anybody else?
Paint scrapers.
My favorite type, unfortunately, just so happens to be the most expensive type. It's a carbide scraper, and they're really, really sharp, but they've got a little handle on them and a blade kind of canted at an angle, and you can scrape a sill. I can get 10 coats of paint off with a carbide scraper. Held just at the right angle with just the right amount of pressure, I can just go right down a sill, take all the paint off right down to it. It just works beautifully.
What do you use for the cedar shake? You can't.
Yeah, really with the cedar shake, power washer, wire brush, you know, you're kind of limited with the cedar shakes because you obviously can't quote unquote sand them. You know, so power washing. Fortunately, cedar shakes, as you said, cedar shakes, usually there's not much of an issue with peeling paint on them.
Well, ours outside is.
We paint outside.
Yeah.
And if there is a failure of the paint, it's usually on the south side because that takes the beating the worst.
With painting on the cedar shakes, what's your thought on using a sponge versus brush?
When you say a sponge, do you mean a paint pad?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, generally speaking, I hate paint pads, okay? I must be challenged because I seem to have tons of trouble getting them to work. That being said, if there's an application where they work slick as heck, it's on cedar shakes.
And not on the smooth, just on the shake.
Every time I've tried to use them, they've failed me. But I have heard numerous times from people that they work like a charm if you just like dip like like about 1/3 of the paint pad. You know, don't dip the whole thing in, and you don't want it to get into, you don't want to dip it physically like too far into the paint so that the paint kind of oozes up onto the top of it, and you want to kind of tilt it at an angle and just kind of dip it in the paint. I mean, we sell a ton of them, and people that use them love them for cedar shakes.
Look good.
Yeah.
Our shakes are on vertical grooves, so really.
I'm the freak that's just never, I guess it's just, as they say, it must be in the wrist or whatever, because it's, I can work great with a roller and a brush and everything. I never tape anything, but I can't get those paint pads to work for me. But my house is brick, so I've never had a cedar shake house, and the houses that I had when I was younger that were wood were all horizontal clapboards, so it was just a brush I used with those. So I've never had a cedar shake house that I've owned and painted. Any other questions about application you guys can think of?
Where I get those cracks on, it's on the smooth part, smooth trim.
The cracks that are kind of like mud check, they look sort of alligator. They go crossways, and it almost looks like when you have a hard rain and there's a puddle of mud, and then right away the sun comes out and it warms up, and then the mud kind of cracks. It's called mud checking. That's the technical term for it, named after what happens to mud after rain. Is that the pattern of your priming? Yeah, and it's extremely difficult to get those off. A better route for you to take we have a thing called Peel Bond, I think it is. It's made by XIM. Your young bride should take notes. XIM, it's either Peel Bond or Peel Stop. I can't think of it. I think it's called Peel Bond. You put 2 coats of that on. It's the only primer where they want to have 2 coats of primer. And it will actually, it's like an elastomeric type product, and it will fill in that and give you a level surface. You put 2 coats of that on, 2 coats of paint, it'll look like you replaced all the woodwork. And I actually thought that they were kind of, because paint companies from time to time will, shall we say, overstep their statements on their can and make it sound like what you're buying is the next best thing since sliced bread. And last summer, I worked with Steve from Varsity Painters on a good-sized home on like 27th and Fremont. I would say it was floating in at around 12 or 13,000 square feet. And the woodwork looked really bad on the outside, but it was very ornate and very detailed. And Steve goes, I did this once before on an old house, and I couldn't believe it, what it did. And he put on 2 coats of this primer and 2 coats of paint, and honest to gosh, when you went over to that house, it looked like they had had all the trim on this beautiful old house replaced.
So if I understand right, the Peel Bond or stock?
I think it's called Peel Bond. It's made by XIM. That's the primer. And it's the only primer that I'm aware of that they tell you to put on 2 coats to cover up this mud checking thing. And it'll keep it from coming back too. Pretty cool stuff.
Did it work on the?
They used it on the overhangs, on the fascia. They had dental moldings, and on all the window casings. And it looked like all the trim on this 130-year-old house had been replaced. It was just absolutely amazing. Could not believe it. I mean, I've been in this business 40 years, and it takes a lot for me to go up to a house and make my jaw drop after it's done. Okay, any other question you think of, or we'll get into color? Okay, since we got a small group, I think I'm going to, got enough literature for everybody, and then some here. I'm on a committee with Benjamin Moore of North America, where they've taken designers and colorists from North America and Canada. This is a piece that we put together a little over a year ago. We meet once a year in Manhattan for 10 days on a nice expense account. Boo-hoo. I want you guys to take that home, and I want you to read it through. It's really well done, and what we did is structured it so that you can understand the importance of color. Now, granted, this is directed inside, but the same rules apply outside. What happens to your color outside is that you buy a color, you try it, you get it up on the house on the outside, and it's going to look so much lighter. You know, it doesn't look anything like the chip. Okay? Fortunately, the industry's responded by coming out with pint samples now, so that you can take it for a test drive before you buy it.
Yeah, that for exterior things also.
And Benjamin Moore makes paint that's kind of it's not really an inside paint, it's not really an outside paint. I tell them, if you're choosing a Benjamin Moore color, just buy a sample pint and get some tag board and paint it on that. Hirshfield's paints are actual exterior paint. The other thing that's good about this little brochure is that people really get lost when it comes to choosing colors and how to tell them. And if you remember, we're all, I'd say, within 10 years of one another here. If you remember back to art class, we were all taught on the color wheel. okay? And what we've done over here on the right is go over the 4 basic color schemes that people are going to use. And these, again, they're interior shots, but they apply to the outside as well. The vast majority, just to ask a question straight out. Does anybody here live in a Victorian home? Okay, so then we don't have to worry about it. So nobody in the room is going to use more than at max 3 colors on their house. Okay? And you want to follow what's called the 60-30-10 rule. So 60% is obviously going to be the body of the house, 30% will be the trim, and then you're going to save 10% for doing your accenting. Okay? So this talks about color schemes. Let's finish up with this before I get into that. And then it talks about warm colors and cool colors at the back. So I want you to take this home and read it. It's really good. Now, this is a brochure that I personally put together last year. And it goes over what I call my top 10 tips on color, and we're going to go through those. People think outside color scheming is difficult, and it's actually quite easy. I tell customers all the time that the big key to success is you're wanting to try and create a sense of harmony. You want to try and create a feeling that everything belongs. So let's just say, for example, you've got a gray roof and you've got brown or buff-colored brick on the house. You know, you want to work with those colors. When I'm working with, say, a beige color brick and a gray roof that don't maybe necessarily go together, I try and use in my color scheme what I call a bridge color. So something that's kind of a blend of that roof color and that body color. So if you're in your mind, you kind of blended those 2 colors together, the color you would come up with. Because what your ultimate objective when you're color scheming a home is to come up with a sense of harmony and make everything feel like it belongs to the home. Nothing looks worse than if you go up to someone's house, they've got a brown roof on it, white trim, and they've painted the house yellow, and they've painted their front door green. It's like, where's the sense of flow? Where's the sense of continuity? Color scheming, and granted, maybe part of it, I mean, the average person color schemes the outside of a house 3 times in their lives. I do it about 10 times a day, and people pay me $200 an hour to come to their home on Saturdays. I do 3 homes every Saturday, and I'm booked about a month out. And I'm like, it's like falling off a log to me. Because it's like, okay, you've got to work with what you call your fixed assets, which are generally your roof color if you have any stonework on the house. So you've got to work with your fixed assets. You want to incorporate them into the color scheme. You're trying to create a sense of harmony. It's like, duh, what's tough about this? You know, I remember as a little toddler, I went to Mount Olivet Church, and I remember as a little kid, after church, you know, everybody kind of would hang out outside the church. And there was a house that you could see from the parking lot at Mount Olivet Church that was painted like purple. And I remember everybody always laughing about the purple house. Okay? The reason I bring that up is your favorite color, my little sister's favorite color is purple. She's not using it on the outside of her house. She's got plenty of purple on the inside. But you've got to remember a couple of things. Number one, does anybody here know what the number one thing that makes or breaks the sale of a house when you sell a house? What's the number one thing? Curb appeal. Very good. Not very seldom do people get that right. HGTV, okay, yeah. Curb appeal is the number one thing. You know what the number two thing is?
Inside or outside?
This is the number two thing.
I suppose a kitchen or a bath.
Number one's curb appeal, number two's kitchen, number three's bathrooms, number four, lack of clutter. I'm never moving. But the number one thing is curb appeal. And for those of you that are fortunate enough, and I think it's a very fortunate thing, that you have control over the color scheme on your home, you know, you can create curb appeal. Perfect example of this. There's a beautiful brick home in my neighborhood, and I cannot give you any possible reason why, but for some reason, the people had painted the trim on this beautiful used brick home, had split cedar shake roofs, and they had painted the trim on a taxi cab yellow. I'm talking the yellow that they use on yellow cabs. And the house wouldn't sell, and the house wouldn't sell, and finally I was driving by one day and I was like, okay, I cannot keep my mouth shut anymore. And I pulled over, gave him my card, and I said, you know, why don't you try this color? Well, they painted that house, and I'm not exaggerating, the house sold in a week. In this housing market, the house sold in a week after they got rid of the yellow trim. So curb appeal is a huge role, and you have so much power in choosing the paint colors correctly. It doesn't cost any more to do it right than it does to do it wrong. Same price.
And, you mentioned that roof color factory, and I'm not sure how to take that. Is that one of the same?
Well, we're going to go through this one bullet point at a time. Because this is 40 years of doing this in 10 tips. Okay, start by focusing on 2 or 3 colors. I know a lot of you guys living in Bloomington probably live in Ramblers, and most often, or not most often, but often, Ramblers are just done in 2 colors. And that's fine. You know, you're not dealing with a tremendous amount of height. You know, there's some wisdom to the fact that if you use 3 colors on that, it starts to get a little chopped up. You know, it's, you know, not like you're dealing with something like that. Okay? So, nothing wrong with just using just 2 colors on a house. Your body color, like I said, you want to follow this 60-30-10 rule. So you can put 60, 30, and 10 right by ABC there, because that's exactly where they belong. You want one color clearly in dominance on the home. That's the body of the house. The trim color, which is the fascia, the windows, the overhangs. No more two-toning of the windows like they did in the 40s, where, you know, we had storms and screens that you'd take off and those were one color, and, you know, you might have cream-colored trim and maroon-colored storms and windows that you would put on. No. It's all one color there now. Okay? And then your accent color. Typically, your accent color is done on shutters and front door. I know these homes are not exactly what you're going to find around here. These were homes I lifted off of Benjamin Moore's. They have a dealer website thing because I didn't have time to go out and take some pictures. I used to have a whole bunch of wonderful pictures from the Twin Cities, and I can't find them anymore. I guess the joys of getting old. So I lifted these off of, Benjamin Moore has a website for dealers to use. But they're an East Coast company, so these homes are very representative of the East Coast, but nonetheless the principles stay the same. So, but this is a perfect example of where you're going to use, you've got your body color, your trim color, and then your accent color. Okay. Number 2, typically 2 colors are used on a single-story house. We talked about that because a lot of us in Bloomington are going to have ramblers. 3 colors are used on a 1.5 or a 2-story home, while Victorian styles home, which no one has here. I mean, I've done as many as 14 colors on a Victorian home. Obviously not applicable to anybody here. Remember to acknowledge surfaces not to be painted in your color scheme. This is also something we touched on, such as roof, brick, stucco. You know, you should select colors that will enhance these surfaces. Even the landscaping in the terrain may be considered, okay? People kind of overreact to that statement and they think, oh, if I've got a brown roof, I have to paint my house brown, okay? That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying somewhere that roof color, if that's your only fixed asset you're dealing with, somewhere that roof color should be acknowledged in the color scheme. It can be a much lighter shade of that color used on the body. It can be a darker shade of that color used on the shutters of the front door. It doesn't have to be that exact color. It just has to be in that family. Getting back to my example of, you know, yellow house, white trim, green door, brown roof. It's all discombobulated. There's no flow going on. Simple duplication. I always tell my customers, simple duplication is usually the key to success to a well thought out color scheme. So that everything kind of just works harmoniously together. Okay? The number 4 refers to what I call the streetscape. You know, again, in my neighborhood, over by Lake Nokomis, as well as I'm sure most of you guys, a lot of the homes are very similarly styled. Oftentimes, the color scheme that you choose on the home is really about the only way that you can set your house apart from your neighbors. So, lesson learned here, you know, don't paint your house the exact same colors as your neighbors. Use the fact that you have control over your colors, you're able to pick the colors. Use that to create a sense of individuality so that your house looks different than everybody else's. When I have customers come into the store and I ask them to take a picture of the house, obviously the most important picture is what their house looks like from the street, okay? Because that's where we're going to set the theme of the house, we're going to decide on the colors, and we're going to then obviously carry those around to the other 3 sides of the home. But I also tell them when they're standing in front of the house taking a photograph of their house, I want them pan to the right and pan to the left so that I can get a feel for what the neighborhood looks like, what I call the streetscape. You know, so that's an important consideration. Number 5, be aware of the roof colors. Homeowners are not going to change that until it's necessary. Don't ignore that in the color. Instead, acknowledge it somewhere in your color scheme. So again, to reemphasize, if you have a brown roof or a gray roof, that doesn't mean you have to have a brown house or a gray house. It just means that somewhere those colors on the roof should be acknowledged in that color scheme. Okay?
Just to keep it simple, then, using your brown roof thing, it kind of says your trim color should be either a lighter brown or a darker brown. I'm translating from what you said simplistically. Keeping it in the same family, lighter or darker, it means light brown or dark brown trim, or much lighter.
No, you can incorporate different shades or intensities of the roof color. You can acknowledge the roof color with the body, you can acknowledge the roof color with the trim, or you can acknowledge the roof color with an accent color. I don't care what color you choose to acknowledge the roof color in. You could paint the house cream and have brown trim if you had a brown roof. You could paint the house white and paint the trim cream and Paint the front door brown. I don't care whether it's with the body, the trim, or an accent color. I'm just saying one of those three avenues needs to acknowledge the roof color. That's why people kind of freak out when I say acknowledge those fixed assets in your color scheme, and they're like, oh, but I got a gray roof, I don't want a gray house. I'm like, no. That's not what I'm saying. It can be acknowledged in any part of the grouping of colors you're going to use. Okay? You just want to, the simplest way to put it is in a one succinct sentence is that simple duplication of fixed assets incorporated somehow into that color scheme are going to give you a pleasing end result. Okay? Because everything's going to flow, everything's going to feel like it works together. Okay? Generally, colors look lighter outside than the samples look in the store. If I said to you, for example, to paint your house that color, you guys might all freak out and think, oh, that's going to be really, really dark. Guess what? When you get it up on the house, it's not. Okay? Remember that light really affects how one sees color. And when you're looking at what amounts to a glorified postage stamp of the color, as opposed to 30 or 40 feet of the color outside where the light source is higher and the actual physical space is bigger, completely different thing. Paint companies have responded to consumers by allowing you to buy pints of paint that you can either paint on tagboard, or you can, the Benjamin Moore I just painted on tagboard. The Hirshfield's paint, I would, actually the Hirshfield's comes in an exterior paint so you can actually put it on. They're still kind of, they've cut a lot of corners, they've left out a lot of the good resins. They are just designed for checking color. They should be painted over. You should never use these little $5 sample things and leave that as a finish coat outside. And people all the time are thinking, oh, I just need to touch something up, I'll just buy one of those little sample pints, and then they wonder why it's all caking off next year. Well, it's what I have affectionately deemed fake paint. It has the right amount of titanium in, so it takes the color correctly, but it's just designed for that, to test the color. So if you're going to put it on the house, make sure you paint over it. Okay? So the general rule of thumb to follow is to actually get it up on the house and live with it. Solicit other people's opinions, see what other people think. Don't ever get a sample up, go over to the paint store, buy the paint, do it all in one day. I've had too many customers, men and women, at the counter crying because they rushed into a decision and they've got $200, $300, $400 worth of paint. I had a couple of years ago, I had done a special on Care 11 on Saturday morning. And this guy wanted me to come out and color scheme his house, which I did, and he was absolutely bent on the idea of having a yellow house. I said, yellows can be kind of tricky to work with. There's that fine line between a yellow looking stylish and a yellow looking garish, okay? this looks stylish. But there's that fine line. And I said, this was before the paint companies had come out with sample paints, which are just a fairly recent innovation because they've got these new computerized tint machines that can tint minor amounts of pigment, small amounts of pigment, so they keep the integrity of the color. So at that time, you had to buy a quart of paint. So, we didn't see eye to eye on the color. And I said, well, fine. I said, try the yellow that you think you like. And, just get a quart and try it and paint out an area and make sure you like it before you have the whole house painted. Well, he had hired one of these companies where they have like 20 guys that come in and tape everything up, do all the prep work. They don't use power washers. They do sanding, they do scraping and everything, dust everything off, prime it with a fast drying primer, spray the house out, and they're like literally in and out in one day. People just like a bunch of bumblebees ascending on a house. So the guy calls me up late in the afternoon. I was still at work. He calls me up, and I'm not kidding, he was crying. He goes, I have come home to a giant flippin' banana. And I'm like, did you try the paint color before you pulled the trigger? He says, yeah, I had the painters paint a little piece of the cove molding on one of the windows. I'm like, how are you going to tell anything from that? Use up the can of paint. You can't tell on the, what, and this was a huge house out in Eden Prairie. You can't tell what it's going to look like by doing a little area like that. You got to paint a good size area, at least 4 foot square, before you can accurately judge the color. Anyway, he hired the painters back and they repainted the house because he couldn't live with it. But it was just, it was funny, but it wasn't funny because, here's this adult man that's in tears because he had pushed himself into the, making this snap decision. I'm sure he was a high-powered executive and thought that he perhaps knew more than, the lowly guy that runs a paint store. So, enough said. He repainted his house. Let's see, I did give everybody these, okay. I want to make sure everybody gets. This is Hirshfield's Historical Colors, and this is a color card that I did last year that shows 3 color schemes, so you can have those. The large block of color is intended for use on the body. The 2 smaller blocks of color, you can use either one, trim or accent, whichever you prefer. So it's I designed the color system so the large square of color is for the body. You can use this on the trim and that for an accent, or this on the trim and that for an accent. Either way. Okay?
What about gutters and downspouts? Do you paint?
That's considered part of your trim.
That's part of the trim?
Yes. Okay. And if they're powder-coated gutters that are factory finished, then that's going to require a special primer. You come over to the store and we'll sell you the correct primer to get that. Because the secret in painting factory finished gutters is in getting a primer that's going to really stick onto those. Just a regular house paint primer is not going to do a good job. Okay, so let's get back.
So you maybe as house paint primer
on wood.
Gutter, it doesn't matter. If for most people in one time gutters are painted on it. It doesn't have to be the problem.
Right.
So you just said
So,
primer.
right, if your gutters are already primed and there's no peeling, then what are you painting? You're painting paint. So all it has to be done is clean.
Okay.
I made the assumption, perhaps the wrong assumption, I made the assumption that you had a factory finished gutter that's never been painted.
It's never been painted yet.
Right. So my advice to you was correct. You're going to need a special, because the key in a factory primed gutter is in the primer. Once that primer's on and you've got house paint on it and you're repainting the house, all you're painting is paint. So then the only thing is clean and dry. But in her case, because her factory finished gutters had never been painted before, she's got to get a good foundation that will accept the paint. And gutters are kind of a bugaboo because, you know, you get ice in them, you get the swelling and contraction and everything. And, you know, gutters aren't the easiest thing to keep paint on. Okay? All right. So, I even, yellows, and I don't know why I put pink in there, but yellows and pinks are the two colors that consistently burn people. They're the two colors that advance. They always look stronger outside than they do on the chips. So they're colors you really have to proceed with caution. Well, very few people paint their houses pink anymore, so that's, guess I could have left that part of it out and just talked about yellows. Number 7, color preferences for exteriors are going lighter than they once were. Gone are the really heavy, dark colors, like remember in the 80s when everybody painted their house dark chocolate brown? It's like a mausoleum. Light to medium colors are emerging. So these what I call mid-tone colors are like the super big thing. I'll pass these around. These houses, the bodies are all done in mid-tone colors. Some of them the trim's done lighter, some the trim's done darker. But those are all done in what mid-tone colors are. What are mid-tone colors, people ask me. I'm like, use the light reflective value chart to determine if you've got a mid-tone color. And then I get, what are the light reflective value charts? Anybody ever seen one of these before? Okay, these are called fan decks. They're always at any paint store. They're either on the counter, they're in their color center. They're there for you to use. In the back of every fan deck is an index. And on the far right, there'll be an LRV column. That stands for light reflective value. The color has been put in a spectrophotometer and measured for intensity, or hue, whatever word value, whatever word you want to use on it. They all mean the same thing. Okay? So the color's been measured for the depth of the color. And an LRV, or light reflective value, has been assigned it. Simply put, think of 0 as black, 100 as white. A perfect mid-tone color is going to have an LRV of 50%. You generally want to use a mid-tone color on the body of your house. So it's important that you work with that light reflective value, because I guarantee when you're sitting down at your dining room table after a glass of wine or a beer and you're looking at a color, and the color you decide on, you get that on the outside of the house, it's going to look like off-white. So I'm going to push you as hard as I can to use a stronger color on the outside of your house than you might normally use. more intense,
Okay, not
S-
brighter, more intense.
more intense, more saturated. To put it into a scientific measure, I'm going to push you to use a color that has a lower LRV than perhaps you're comfortable with, because that color is going to illusionarily be much brighter outside and appear much lighter.
Could you pick one of those and tell us what the LRV is to one of the colors in there?
No, but since there's a number of you, and I brought 3 fan decks, each one of you is going to get one, so you can take that home and play with it all you want and pick out the light reflective value of any color you want.
So it has a page number on it.
Yep, yep. It's very, very easy to use. And you'll be really surprised when you really start. If I didn't tell you what I told you and you just picked a color and said, oh, I think that I'd like this color on the outside of my house because I want a sagey green color and I don't want it real dark and oppressive looking. So I think I'd like this color. You take that color and you look up the LRV on it and tell me if it comes anywhere close to a mid-tone color. I would guess it probably has a light reflective value of about 80%, maybe 82. One side's numerical, one side should be alphabetical. That's the color system I actually designed.
It says 58.
58. Okay, so anything over 50 is considered a pastel color. You have to be below that 50% mark to be considered a mid-tone color. So I usually tell people to paint the bodies of their home a color that has a light reflective value of anywhere from 30 to 50%. Accent colors should usually be 15% or less. Usually when I use an accent color, it has an LRV of less than 10%. Okay? So, your hubby and wife, the way the two of you have been interacting, right? So you get a fan deck, and you get your very own fan deck. So everybody's going to walk away with a door prize, and somebody's going to get, well, right now, Will. Tom, why don't you draw me a name out of here? Because I know the lady in the front row wanted to leave for some athletic event instead of my wonderful lecture on color here.
Before everyone leaves, can you talk a little bit about appropriate colors for 1950s vintage ramblers or ranch houses in this area?
You know, it's going to sound corny like it's out of some book, but it's whatever color sings to you. I will say that the trend, because of the turbulent times we live in and the uncertainty that we all have about what's going on with the world and what's going on with politics and this and that and the next thing, I will say that anything that reflects back to nature is wildly popular, whether it's outside or inside.
I was just going to say that when I saw a lot of the houses being built, they were light yellows, kind of minty greens.
And don't forget the colonial blues.
There was the pale blue. There were some brownish reds, and I was just wondering if you had any advice for somebody that would put their house back to a color that was originally gold as far as color schemes or combination. And
you know, there's no, you know, it's what, who's Michael Andrews? How's about $140 worth of free paint?
Sounds pretty good to me, thank you.
There's really no steadfast rule with, you know, I mean, it's going to vary so much because it's going to be driven by what your fixed assets are in the house, and truly what color sings to you. You know, I mean, you got a certain amount. Don't worry about
Oh, I
you.
was gonna ask,
Regarding that, I'm taking it that Bloomington has no regulation on what color you have to have.
No.
Because I mean, like Woodbury, it's gotta be, you know.
Well, my sister lives in a cul-de-sac in Burnsville, and they have to have their colors okay. Yeah. And most of it ends up being Minnesota beige.
Yeah.
But that's actually brings up a good point. And we were talking about the purple house that I used to look at that everybody chided when I was little, over by Mount Olivet. Remember, you're trying to create curb appeal, and even though it's your house and you're painting the house to make you happy, you're really painting the house for everybody else that sees it. Yeah. I mean, how much time do you spend? Thank you. How much time seriously do you spend looking at the outside of your house as compared to your next door neighbor who looks at it every morning? They probably have to open their blinds in their bedroom. So remember that. You're trying to create curb appeal. You want your ultimate return on your dollar. And you're also painting your house for everybody else but you. So that favorite color of yours, it might work out outside, but it might not. You might end up having to paint a bathroom or a bedroom that color. You know? Painting the outside of your house Viking purple, probably not so much. Have you ever been out to Colonial Williamsburg?
I've been there, but I don't know.
They always painted the front doors a bright pop color. And then they typically would stencil pineapples on the door because that's like the international welcome thing. And so you always want, this is a blow up of this house, but you always want to draw attention. Sometimes it's done architecturally, naturally. Sometimes you're going to do it through color. But you always want to draw attention to that front door. That's the greeting to your home. Who's got the other pictures? A common mistake, and I can drive around Bloomington and see it all the time. The garage doors, if they're visible from the front of the home, need to be painted the color of the body of the home. Think of them as movable siding. Think of the garage doors as movable siding. So if they're visible from the front of the home, paint them the color of the body of the house. You can picture frame them in as they did in this picture. You can picture frame them in the trim color, but the doors themselves should be painted the color of the body. If these garage doors were all white here, all it would do is detract from the front door because your eye would go to that. A lot of homes in Bloomington also have blacktop driveways. So you got a blacktop driveway and you've got, you know, somebody that's painted their garage doors, you know, all these fancy, in fact, there's a very loyal long-term customer of mine that lives in Edina, and he happens to used to fly for Northwest, now Delta, but he's a wide-body pilot. And he's got a beautiful wood contemporary A-framed home. And he bought a photo mural of a 747 landing. Blacktop driveway. He cut the mural horizontally and pieced it in so it's on his garage door. And it literally looks like the 747 is landing on his driveway. When you drive by this beautiful home, it's got all this wood that he's got sickens on that looks just so beautiful and everything. You don't even look at the house. All you look at is the garage door. Now, that's an exaggerated example of what I'm talking about, but the principle's there. You know, when people come and visit you in the home, you don't turn to your husband and go, honey, I'm going to go open the garage door and let our guests in. You want them to be drawn to the front door of your home And you can do it with color, you can do it with potted flowers, you can do it with wreaths, you can do it with the little greenery that they stick in the pots in the wintertime, but you want to do everything you can to make the front door the welcoming to your home.
Bloomington, you see garage doors that are wooden, slatted, varnished. It looks nice. What you're saying is, you have some mistake.
In my opinion, absolutely. Absolutely a mistake. Rips my heart out when I see people that, you know, if you've got your garage doors on the side of your home or in the back of your home or something like that, that's a whole different conversation. But it rips my heart out when people spend thousands of dollars for these beautiful garage doors, and then they have a contractor come in and put this Sickens makes a specialty product that almost ends up with your garage doors looking like they're varnished. And they spend all this money to have them finished, and they got this beautiful 3-car garage, you know, on their lovely McMansion, and the garage doors are visible from the front. You walk by the house and all you do is look at the garages. And I'm like, that's not the focal point of your home. You know, save the money, take your young bride on a cruise, put in steel doors. If you have to paint them, fine. Put in some nice raised panel steel doors. Get the insulating things, so you get a good insulating product on there. Save the money. It's a waste of money in my opinion. Okay, let's see if we soft contrast, we kind of went over that. Use color to create individuality. That goes back to where we're talking about the streetscape and everything. That so often, you know, don't paint your house the same color as your neighbors, and take the paint for a test drive before you go and use it. Pretty much covered them all. Question?
Tone on tone house, what is that?
Pardon me?
Tone
Tone
on
on tone is using, when I say tone on tone, that's a monochromatic color scheme, and it's using, let's get to something where someone would actually paint the outside.
Yeah, monochromatic color scheme, what
Right, right. And monochromatic color schemes are what I call a goof-proof color scheme. I was just mentoring a couple of my new hires on color scheming today. Monochromatic color schemes are just using different colors off the same card that are in the same family. What I do tell people to do is skip a color in between. So you can use this, this, and this. You can use this, this, and this. But if you use two of your colors that are right next to each other, if you're doing a monochromatic color scheme, you're going to end up with the colors with it looking like there's no contrast. So you need to, you can skip more than one if you want, but at minimum skip one. Anybody want me to autograph their color fan deck since I designed the colors? It took me 3 years to do that. It's not as easy when you design a color scheme. It's not as easy to do as one might think.
Do you have any more questions?
One more,
Probably wrap it up.
A couple months ago, I was at soccer competition and can't remember this. Anyway,
Probably Sherwin-Williams over on Penn Avenue. We affectionately call it Shirley Williams in our industry.
They at that time they said everything's 30%. Well, it was a good sale. I didn't realize it, but it was a good sale.
All paint companies put their best foot forward the 10 days before Memorial Day weekend, because that's the people that are proactive that are painting then, which is probably when you went over to Sherwin-Williams. And then again the 10 days before Labor Day weekend, which is when all the procrastinators are getting it done, because of course the day after Labor Day is going to have a blizzard. Industry-wide, no matter where in the country you live, no matter what climate, no matter what company, The best value you can get on paint is the 10 days before Memorial Day and the 10 days before Labor Day weekend. Always. Sherwin-Williams, Sears, Home Depot, Hirshfields, everybody. We're all on the same page. One of the few common denominators in our industry. It's just because it's simple. The proactive people that want to get it out of the way and check it off their to-do list and enjoy the summer, and the people that are like, oh, any minute now I'm going to have to get out my snowblower, which I'm like, October is the best month there is for painting. After the first hard freeze, bugs are gone, it's not real hot, so the paint doesn't cook on.
Coverage, I guess I don't have to cover.
Real easy way to do that, to figure out how much paint you need. Perimeter of the house. You can just paste it off if you want. Okay, so the perimeter of the house times the median height. Okay, divide by 350. I'm sorry. Perimeter of the house times the median height. Take off 10% for doors and windows. Divide by 350. That gives you the number of gallons for one coat. So distance around the house times your height, less 10%, that's for doors and windows, divide by 350.
So you're saying 350
square feet per gallon. You seem like the responsible one. So this is, Tom is my lead salesman. He does a lot with color scheming, as do I.
These modern paints are holding true in the colors. In the old days, they said always paint on white. This is my primer.
Favorite painter, if you guys decide to take the lazy route and have it done for you. Not making a social statement, but the one guy I recommend hires all Russian people, which is my heritage. And this gentleman that I gave you, who's the other guy I always recommend, hires Mexican people. And these guys just did a lot of work on my house this last summer because my 60th birthday's coming up this fall. And I got people coming in from all over the country for it. And I wanted everything just perfect, and I had, being in the business, procrastinated a few things. I'll tell you, the Russian immigrants and the people from Mexico, they work their tails off. And I've seen other painters around that are just like, oh, well, maybe I'll get to this, maybe I'll get to that. We're not going to get political here, but I was just watching the news the other day, and they had a big piece about how the work ethics have just gone down and down and down and down. So these guys work so hard. So I'm all about that.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much.
Welcome. Anybody have any questions? Thank you very much. Anybody have any questions that didn't get answered?
I enjoyed the talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate that.
Just
It's not my first time talking about this subject.
If you paint two coats, the samples, if you put it around big enough area, you don't have to paint like undercoat or light undercoat anymore. I was told one time, well, the time when we painted our crease, got kind of a lighter blue-green on it. But it was covered in chocolate brown, so we put a white primer over.
I would say that's not necessary anymore, unless, you know, if it was extremely inexpensive paint and you could just take a white paper towel and like wipe off the paint type thing. Then it would be appropriate to seal it in. If it's a decent quality paint, you know, 2 coats of paint should get you through the day.
So we'll stay true as same.
There's enough solids in today's modern day paint that 2 coats of paint's going to cover almost anything.
Thank you.
Okay?